Welcome everyone to Daf Yomi 1 week at a time, Masechet Chullin. This is our 16th class, and today we're going to be reviewing Daf 105 to 110. And today we're going to be talking about literally like the picture, eating meat and milk, and what we need to do in between. Okay, so the Gemara tells us that after eating cheese, you need to wipe your mouth. This is according to Beit Shammai, or Beit Hillel say you actually have to wash your mouth out. Again, we'll talk about it in a minute. We're used to this idea of waiting after eating meat, waiting to eat milk, but it is important to recognize that after we eat cheese, you can't just eat a steak right afterwards. You have to clean out your mouth. So Beit Shammai say you just have to wipe your mouth. Beit Hillel say you need to wash your mouth. Now, Daf 105, the Gemara says, what does it mean to wipe your mouth? To wipe your mouth means to eat bread, and you don't actually have to wash out your mouth. Or maybe what they mean is you also need to wash your mouth, meaning you eat bread and then you also wash your mouth. So the Gemara says, yes, that Beit Shammai say you have to wipe your mouth and wash your mouth. Beit Hillel also say both, and therefore they really aren't arguing. And since we're saying that wiping your mouth is with eating bread, we say it's wheat bread, not barley bread. Barley bread is not as good, and it should be cold and not hot, and it should be soft and not hard. Or really, the Gemara says you can use whatever you want. The only thing you can't use is flour, dates, or like vegetables. Okay, and now the question is, how long do you need to wait between meat and milk? So you ate meat and then milk. How much do you have to wait? And one opinion is you can eat it right away. The Gemara says, what do you mean you can eat it right away? We say, no, that if you ate cheese first, then you can eat meat right away. Again, right away in the sense that you don't have to wait a certain amount of time. But the opposite, you can't eat cheese after meat. The Gemara asks, what if you have meat in between your teeth? So, like, what do you do with that? Does it count? Is it still considered meat, or is it just, what's left in your teeth? Okay, now let's go to how long you have to wait. So the Gemara says some people would actually wait a full 24 hours. If you think 6 hours is long, there's some people who would wait 24 hours after meat. Some people just waited till the next meal. That's the understanding that we have nowadays, till the next meal. And then the question is, what's the next meal? 3 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours. As a side point, the Gemara says that just gives you advice that it's good for you to check your property every day. And the Gemara actually gives stories of people who went to go check their property, and because they went out to see their property, they actually saved money by, they discovered that something was going on and they happened to have been there exactly at the right time. Okay, since we were talking about wiping your mouth, now the Gemara talks about washing hands. So the Gemara says that when you first wash your hands, it's a mitzvah in the beginning of the meal, and at washing your hands at the end of the meal, which is called mayim achronim, that is an obligation. So there seems to be a distinction between mitzvah and chovah, and obligation, or maybe both are obligatory, but the washing in the middle of the meal is optional. Okay, how does one wash their hands? You pour water into a utensil, a kli, or maybe you can pour it onto the ground. Mayim achronim, again, when we wash our hands at the end of the meal, they cannot be poured on the ground because we'll see in a second, but the water is very dirty and therefore it should not go on the ground. It should only be in a vessel. Okay, mayim rishon, again, mayim rishon, when you wash your hands in the beginning of the meal, you should not, so the question is, do you use hot water or cold water? So one opinion is you can use hot or cold, but for mayim achronim, only cold. And here, the Gemara says that actually cold water removes the dirt better. Hot just smooths your hand, which I think is very interesting because I would imagine we would say the opposite. Or you could actually use hot water, but not boiling water. Okay, we said that if you have a meat dish after cheese, so you have to wash your hands because again, you touched the cheese. Now, when you want to touch the meat, you have to wash your hands. Now, why do we have mayim achronim at the end of the meal? This is an obligation because of the what's called melach sdomit, the salt from Sdom, which actually, like nowadays, has a lot of sulfur in it. So the salt from Sdom actually was dangerous if you touched your eyes. So again, in those days, if you were eating with your hands, we want to make sure that you wash your hands really well before you go on your way, lest you, again, the Gemara says, lest you blind your eyes, because, you know, if you get it in your eye, it could be very dangerous. Okay, now the Gemara lists 8 statements by Abaye. They're not all connected. The first one happens to be mayim achronim, which is why it's here, but what connects all the statements is that Abaye thought one way originally, and then he was taught by Mar, who's Rabbah, and he taught him actually a different reason, and then he like changed his mind. And it's 8 different cases how basically Rabbah taught Abaye how to understand certain things. Okay, so we'll go through them, right? So the first one is that you shouldn't wash, we said, the water on it shouldn't go onto the ground. So originally he thought it because it's dirty, it's repulsive, but then Rabbah taught him that really it's about the evil spirits. So you're going to see that originally Abaye thinks that a lot of things are maybe what we would call more rational, and Rabbah says to him, no, it's actually because there's this supernatural world that you don't understand. Between you and me, again, my personal humble opinion is that when the Gemara talks about evil spirits, I think that they're talking about like bacteria, right? Dangerous things that we can't see, right? So if you wash your hands and it's dangerous because it's evil spirits, I think that it's bacteria, but you can also think of it in a more spiritual way. Okay, the next thing, again, all these things are not going to be laws. They're not halachot, but they're more like customs, minhagim, things that they used to do. And again, rational versus supernatural. So the next thing is you shouldn't take the things off the table while somebody is drinking because we're nervous he might choke. That sounds very rational. Rabbah says, no, you shouldn't do it because if you take things off the table while you're drinking, it's going to cloud your mind, right? There's something supernatural going on. You should, when you're gathering crumbs under the table, you should do this because it keeps it clean. Rebbe says, no, because if you don't, it's going to cause poverty again, on a more mystic level. You shouldn't drink the foam on the top of your drink. I guess if it's like beer or something like that, maybe because it's repulsive. Rebbe says, no, no, no. It actually will cause some sort of illness if you drink this foam. You shouldn't eat vegetables that are tied up in a bundle. You should untie them first. And Rebbe says, because if you don't do this, it can trigger witchcraft. And then there's this story of this witch who made a spell, and the rabbis, kind of to cast a spell back. So again, this idea of like witchcraft and supernatural things going on. You should not eat vegetables that fell off the table. Again, because it's dirty. Rabbi says, no, 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 it's because it causes bad breath. You shouldn't sit under a drain pipe. Again, maybe because it's dirty. Rabbi says, no, 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 it's because of the demons. They're demons under the drain pipe. And you should always pour some water out of a pitcher before you drink it. Again, Rabbi says because of these demons. Okay, Daf 106 tells us that if a person isn't careful, the Gemara brings up a famous story that we've seen before in the Gemara about a person. Basically, it's a lesson that you should make sure that you do mayim achronim. So the Gemara says if you're not careful about about washing your hands before and after the meal. So it says, remember the story? What's the story? There's a person who wasn't careful about washing their hands before the meal, and they ended up eating pork. And there's another person who wasn't careful about washing at the end of the meal, and it led to a woman having to get divorced. So the Gemara says that basically the first one, because they didn't wash their hands, the person assumed that they're not Jewish and gave them non-kosher food. The second story is the story about a man who ate, but he didn't do mayim achronim. Generally, when they do mayim achronim, they also clean their beards. So he didn't do that, and he could see that he had lentils in his beard. So the people said, they went to the wife of this man, and they said, your husband told us that you served him lentils, and therefore give us all the money that's in the safe. Anyway, it causes a big commotion, and the husband actually divorces his wife because of this. Okay, back to hot water. So hot water cannot be used for washing your hands, or maybe it can, but the hot springs of Tiberia, if you've ever been to Tiberia, there are natural hot springs. They cannot be used for washing hands, for nitilat yadayim, but they can be used for tvilat yadayim. Tvilat yadayim means dipping your hands in, and everyone agrees that you can use it for this. The question is, do you need to use a kli, a vessel, or not? Water that becomes unfit for an animal to drink, so then you cannot use that water to wash your hands. We said that you have to wash your hands before, but why do you have to wash your hands before the meal? We're actually talking about washing for bread before the meal. Why do we do this? It's a gzira, it's a decree because of truma. If you remember, truma is eaten by the kohanim. They have to make sure that their hands are pure. Therefore, when they ate truma, they would have to wash their hands. Therefore, we wash our hands to remind ourselves, right, of what the kohanim did when they ate truma. And therefore, it's referred to as a mitzvah because really it's a rabbinic commandment. It's dirabanan, and it's a mitzvah to listen to the sages. Okay. Some people, right, it says that people clean their hands before eating fruit. So this is permissible, but not obligatory. And two people who eat together, each person needs to make the blessing after the meal. Because again, it's two people and not three. If it's three, then they can bless all together. Okay, now they talk about how much of the hands you need to wash. So for washing your hand, for regular food, for chullin, so it says till the joint. And when washing your hands for truma, it's till the joint. And washing your hands for the Beit HaMikdash is till the joint. So the Gemara says, you just said the same thing. What's going on? So basically, it's different joints, right? So for chullin, it says you only have to do till the, I guess you can see, right? Your finger basically has the joint that's at, we'll go from your fingertip, right? So there's one joint, two joint, and then the third joint is already where the finger is attached to the hand. So the Gemara says that you have to wash to the second joint, meaning, right, most of the finger for regular food, then to this joint for truma, and then some say actually till the wrist, and then for the Beit HaMikdash, you have to wash your hands till your elbow. The Gemara actually says, we now wash till the elbow, till the wrist, for when we eat, even though really it says that you only have to do to the joints. But that's why, if let's say you have to wash your hands, let's say on Yom Kippur, when you're really not supposed to wash, right? We only wash till here, right? We just wash the fingers and not the whole hand, because really washing should be till your wrists. Okay. The Gemara says now also when you wash your hands, technically you can just wash your hands in the morning and then just be very careful with whatever you're doing all day, and you don't need to wash them again. The issue is that most people are not careful with their hands. We touch all these different things, and therefore, if you eat bread in the morning and then you're going to eat bread again in the afternoon, you really should wash again. Daf 107, the Gemara says, well, maybe when it said you don't have to wash the whole day, maybe that's only talking about if there's a water shortage, right? What's called a sha'at hadchak, when we, when it's extenuating circumstances. But in general, you should wash for every meal if you are having bread. Okay. Also, you cannot wash your hands in, let's say, flowing water, because when you wash your hands, it has to be done what's called with koach adam. The person has to create the washing. So for example, let's say you go, you're somewhere and there's no cup, but there is a faucet. So you might think, oh, I'll turn on the faucet and then I'll just put my hands under the faucet. Really, the halakha says that you should turn on and off the water so that every time you're washing your hands, it's because you turned on the water. So that would be the proper way to wash if you don't have a cup. But again, the best way to wash is with a kli, with a utensil. Okay, so speaking of utensils, the Gemara says that the kli must be able to hold a revi'it, right? Right. It's quite a small measurement, so you can use a small cup. We're used to very large washing cups, but it does not have to be so big. It can even be small. And the Gemara teaches, and this is for halakha, let's say, we have this often when people go on a tiyul, on a hike, and there isn't a lot of water, you can actually put, two sets of hands right underneath each other and just pour it like that. And therefore, both people are washing at the same time. Again, you should use a proper cup. It shouldn't be something that's chipped or broken. It should be something that, excuse me, that is appropriate. Okay. Then the Gemara says you should not use like a sack to wash because it's actually not made to hold water, even though it could hold water. It's not really a kli, and therefore you should not use it. Okay, next, this very, very practical laws. The Gemara says, and I don't know if you're familiar with this, but there is an idea that if you, let's say you want to eat a sandwich. So some people, and we're going to see it right now in a minute. What if you hold the sandwich with a napkin? Do you have to, maybe that can suffice and you don't have to wash your hands. So the Gemara actually mentions this on Daf 107. Okay. Right, the Gemara asks, can I cover the food with a napkin and eat it without washing, right? And I guess it's a 2,000-year-old issue of people who are lazy and don't really want to get up and wash. So can I just cover my bagel with a napkin? And then I don't mean cover it so that I'm holding it with the napkin and then eat it that way. So they bring up an example of Rabbi Tzadok, who would actually fast. He fasted many, many days, and to keep him alive, they would actually feed him. So what would they do? They would cover the food with a napkin, and it would be less than a kazait, so very little, and they would do it outside of the sukkah. I guess it was Sukkot, and he wouldn't bench afterwards. So again, maybe it's because it's less than a kazait. It's a very small amount. Maybe that's why it was okay. So now we try another story. They found two sages who were eating bread, and they were eating it, again, covered with a napkin. So now it says, Shmuel did wash his hands. But other people did not. So Gemara says, no. The people that were using the napkin were actually kohanim, right? They were priests, and they were being careful to not touch the food because, again, they were kohanim and they were trying to be as pure as possible. Therefore, it shows that you could eat with a napkin without washing your hands. So this is something that one could do. Again, not the best thing to do, but you could do it. Let's say a person is feeding another person. So then who needs to wash their hand, right? So is it, right, again, are we concerned that the person who's being fed might touch the food and therefore he should wash his hands? Or again, the person who's feeding needs to wash their hands because they're doing the feeding, but they're not doing the eating, which is very interesting. That is discussed in the Gemara. Let's say if you know that there is more food coming, so you don't have to make a blessing on each food that you're getting because it's a meal and there's more things coming. Okay, if let's say, again, fascinating, right? Let's say you have a person feeding their child on Yom Kippur, right? Obviously, the adult is not going to eat, but the child is going to eat. The Gemara says that the person feeding the child needs to wash their hands. Here it seems because, right, they didn't wash their hands at all. As we said, on Yom Kippur, you don't wash your hands. So therefore, if they're going to be feeding with their hands, they should wash their hands. And the eater also needs to wash their hands. And then the Gemara says, actually, the person who's feeding does not need to wash their hands. Okay, next Mishnah. Okay, the Mishnah on Daf 107 tells us that you can put meat and milk in one shopping bag as long as they're not touching each other. Okay, here the assumption is that they're not covered, right? They're open so they can be together in a bag, but they can't be touching each other. And you can eat them on the same table. So now the Gemara is going to explain. This is only if everything is cold. And then they can, and if they do touch, if they're cold, if they do touch, all you have to do is wash off the surface and then it's okay. Now, let's say two people are sitting together and eating. If they don't know each other, meaning they're not friendly, then one can eat meat and one can eat milk because we're not concerned that they're going to share food because they don't really know each other. But if you do know each other, you cannot eat a regular meal together because you might, pick from their plate and that would be problematic. The Gemara, unfortunately, it's sad. It says brothers who are on bad terms with each other are they allowed to eat together? Because they're in a fight, so maybe they're not going to share. And the Gemara says no, because I guess they're really their brothers. So even if they're in a fight, maybe they would share. Okay. Daf 108. Hold on a second. Okay. Daf 108 has a is the Mishnah that's like the core of all these discussions about meat and milk. Okay, so Daf 108 is like a super, I would say, like a fundamental Mishnah. So what does the Mishnah say? The Mishnah says that if a drop of milk fell on meat that was cooking in a pot, so now if it gave the meat flavor, meaning it is not 1/60. Remember we talked about the 60th. So if it's more, I don't know how to say it like mathematically. If it's not nullified, meaning if there's more than 1/60 parts, so then it gives the meat flavor. Therefore, the meat is asur. If, let's say, you stirred the pot at the time, so now, again, so just think about it. There's a pot. So think about let's say you're making stew. Okay, so let's say there's a big piece of meat in a pot with gravy and carrots and potatoes, but there's a big piece of meat. Now, if the milk falls right on the meat, I look at the piece of meat versus the drop of milk, 1/60. Now, if while the milk fell into the pot, I was actually mixing the pot, which means it fell into the entire pot, now I have to look if it's 1/60 of the whole pot, meaning of everything that's there. And if it's more than 1/60th, it is forbidden. Okay, so that is the Mishnah. So now the Gemara says, right, the principle is called in Hebrew ta'am ki'ikar, right? The ta'am, the flavor, is what's important. So that even if, right, so the Gemara said that it's the flavor that makes it forbidden. And even if that thing isn't there anymore, right? So again, if you drop cheese onto meat, so I can still see the cheese, but milk, if I drop a drop of milk onto meat, it gets absorbed. I don't see it anymore. So it's not about it's about the milk, but it's about the flavor, the ta'am of the milk. And the Gemara says that this is actually deoraita. Okay, so the Gemara says, well, wait a minute. Meat and milk might be something very unique, right? Because what's so unique about meat and milk? Separately, they're totally fine. You mix them together and now they're forbidden, right? It's not like non-kosher food. Non-kosher food is already non-kosher, right? It's originally non-kosher. But here, both of these things are fine by themselves, just together they're not good. And the Gemara says that because it's unique, maybe I can't learn this principle of the flavor of tam kikar for other things. And the Gemara says no, it's not a unique case. The Mishnah teaches us that this is about flavor, and therefore we can learn it to other things as well. Okay. Or maybe the issue is that when we're talking about cooking things, that's when we care about flavor. Okay, so remember we said the milk fell on the meat. Now, what happens? The meat, let's say it's more than 1/60th, the meat becomes forbidden. And now, right, again, now the meat is in a pot of other meat, and remember we talked about the concept of min bimino. I have the same type of things in the pot, right? I have a pot of stew. One piece of meat is asur, is forbidden because there was milk on it. The others are totally fine. Now, remember, Rabbi Yehuda said that we can never nullify the same things together, right? Meat, we say it doesn't become nullified. But if I mixed it, so then it's not min bimino because milk fell onto the meat, but in the pot I have gravy, I have potatoes, I have carrots, and therefore what do? I ignore, right, the other meat, and then I say that it becomes nullified in the things that are already in the pot. Okay, next concept. Sorry, one second. Okay, next concept is called, in Hebrew, it's called efshar lisochto, which literally means, can I squeeze it out? What are we talking about? So the idea is that, again, milk fell onto meat. Now the meat is cooking. Now when the meat is cooking, the milk flavor gets released into the pot as it's cooking. So the question is, because the milk is being released into the pot, is that permitted because now it's going to be nullified in the pot, or is it forbidden? And that is a machloket. Again, right? The meat, again, the idea is that the meat had milk in it. When that meat is now in the pot, does the milk leave the meat and therefore everything becomes nullified, or it remains asur, it remains prohibited? So that actually is a machloket. Some say that it remains prohibited, it's asur, and some say that it is mutar. Okay, so again, if you remember, the Torah tells us you're not allowed to cook meat with milk. So this is an interesting understanding. It's saying that what is asur? What's asur is the meat, right? With milk goes on to meat, the meat is asur, but the milk itself is not, and therefore, when it goes into the pot, maybe it's permitted. No, the Gemara says, no, that's not the case. Meat and milk, both of them are prohibited. You can't say it's one as opposed to the other. Now, let's say it's the opposite. Let's say I have a pot of boiling milk and meat falls into it, right? So it absorbs the milk, but so again, it's very interesting when we talk about absorption of flavor and cooking. So here, the Gemara says actually the meat absorbs the milk, but the milk doesn't absorb the meat flavor, which is interesting. I'm not sure if chemically that's true, but the idea is, we're going to see this also in a minute, there's this idea of what is right with something, the Gemara will say that if something is releasing a flavor, it isn't absorbing at the same time, meaning it only goes in one direction, which is also, I think, just very interesting. So the Gemara says, maybe the case is that actually you remove the meat out of this boiling pot of milk, and therefore if you remove it, again, maybe something about it would be okay. This is not the law, and we didn't talk about the amount, but that is one case. The next case is, what if half a zayit, right? Half of an olive amount of meat is cooked with half a zayit of milk. So nothing is a full shear. So if you eat it, you're liable, right? Because again, half and half, right? So if you have, right, a little piece of meat and you put a little piece of cheese on it, so you make a mini cheeseburger, if you eat it together, it's a zayit of a cheeseburger, and that is forbidden. But you would not be liable for cooking it together because they don't combine, right? It's half and half, and therefore they don't combine. And therefore, again, liable for eating, but not for cooking it. Or another opinion is you are liable for cooking it. Again, that is the machloket. The other machloket is about when we're stirring the pot, right? Because that creates a different reality of what is mixing with what, right? When I mix it, the flavor goes into the whole pot, and therefore we have a different ratio in terms of our mixture. Daf 109 says that if you stirred it right away, of course it would be nullified. The question is, what if you only stirred it at the end? What does that do with our ta'arovet, our mixture? Okay, and that is that machloket. Okay, the next Mishnah is going to talk about the udder. Okay, the udder of a cow, which is, again, fascinating. We don't eat it nowadays, but an udder is meat, but inside of it is milk. So how do we eat that? So the Mishnah tells us that the udder, if you want to eat it, what do? You actually have to rip it open and remove the milk, and then you can eat it. Interestingly, the Mishnah says if you don't do it, it's not prohibited to eat it. So we'll see what that means. The same thing with a heart. If you want to eat the heart of an animal, you have to rip it open and take out all the blood. And again, if you don't, there's no isur, there's no prohibition. So now the Gemara is going to explain that. What does it mean if you don't do it? It's not forbidden. Does it mean that it's permitted, or you shouldn't do it? And if you don't, so you still shouldn't do it, right? If you remember when we learned in Masechet Shabbat, we had the concept of patur aval asur, meaning you're exempt, but you shouldn't do it. So here, when it says it's not forbidden, it's not forbidden and it's okay, or it's not forbidden, but you shouldn't do it. So the one opinion is it's okay. You can totally eat it regular. But again, it implies that it's still problematic. We say that the heart needs to be opened, but the udder actually is okay, is permitted, even if you did not open it up. Or maybe the opposite, that the heart, you can open it and remove the blood, but the udder, maybe you can't even open it and take out the milk. Maybe it's forbidden completely. But again, the other way to look at it is the opposite, which is the heart, you must open it and take out the blood. The udder, you should, but if you don't, it's also okay. Okay, and then the Gemara talks about the difference between a stomach of an animal that just drank milk, right? So in the stomach, there is milk. And if you cook the stomach with the milk, it's forbidden. But if you cook it's why? It's the same thing. Milk, milk, meat, meat. Like, what's the problem? So, I mean, why is there a distinction? So the Gemara says, actually, maybe the milk in the udder isn't really considered milk yet because it hasn't left the udder yet. So it's like pre-milk, if there's such a thing. Okay, then the Gemara says, how do we open up these things? You have to rip it open lengthwise and widthwise and remove the milk and like squeeze it out, or maybe you just have to open it and it comes out by itself. Now we have a famous discussion with Yalta. Yalta was a famous, very wise woman in the time of the Gemara. She's generally the stories that we have are quite, she's quite spirited. She tends to sometimes yell, but she's very smart. So Yalta says that when God gave us certain commandments, if he prohibited something, he also permits something that's very similar. What's the example? Right, so she says, right, the Torah says you can't eat blood, but you can eat liver, right, which is quite either tastes like blood or is blood-like, right? You can't have relations with a woman who's in nida, but you could have relations with a woman who has what's called dam tohar. Dam tohar is after a woman gives birth. So the second half of her impurity is only what's called dam tohar. The days that she counts are only because she can't go to the Beit HaMikdash, to the temple, but she could be with her husband. Right? Let's say if you want to eat the fats from an animal, you can't eat the fats from a domesticated animal, from a behema, but you can eat the fats from a chaya, a non-domesticated animal, right? You can't have relations with a non-Jewish woman, but as we're going to see in next week's parsha, we have the concept of eshet yifat toar, right? Taking a captive woman from the battlefield. So there is a case where you are allowed to be with this non-Jewish woman. Of course, it's a very complicated case. You see her at war and you take her to your home. You have to wait 30 days. Anyway, it's more complicated, but it's I guess, a way to permit certain things. So she says, I want to eat meat and milk, and what am I going to eat? So her husband says, don't worry, you can eat the udder, right? And he says, go and roast the udder, and it sounds like he says you don't even have to cut it open. So the Gemara says, actually, there's a distinction if you roast it as opposed to have to rip it open, but if you're cooking it, you do. Daf 110 tells us that Rav went to a certain city and he heard that people were discussing cooking meat and milk, and therefore he made a gader, a fence, right? And he said, right, halachically, not physically, and he says, oh, you know what? Not only can you not eat meat and milk, you can't even eat the udder, but really you could eat the udder. So the Gemara is explaining why he made this decree. Another possibility is that he was talking about the udder of a nursing animal, which has a lot of milk, as opposed to a regular animal that doesn't, right? And then there's a story about they brought different sages. The udder, some people ate it, some people didn't. And they talk about different cities where in Pumbedita, in Bavel, and Babylonia, right? Some cities, they did eat it. In other cities, they didn't eat it. So there's a story of Rami Bar Tamre that actually went from Pumpadita to Sura, and he saw all these people throwing out the udder, and he's like, "Why are you throwing it out? I'll eat it." And then they say to him, "Why are you eating it? Right? You're supposed to keep the stringencies of this town, right? The town that you left and the town that you got to, and here we don't eat it, so you shouldn't eat it." And he says, "No, no, no." Right? He says, "This is my." I actually ate it outside of the city, and therefore it's okay. And since we're talking about Rami, we say that they said they noticed that he wasn't wearing tefillin. They said, "Why are you not wearing tefillin?" So he says, "Oh, actually, I stomach issue, and if you have stomach issues, you don't have to wear tefillin." If you remember, in the time of the Mishnah and the Gemara, they wore tefillin all day, and if you're constantly going to the bathroom, you have to take it on and off, and therefore you shouldn't wear your tefillin all day. They also noticed that he wasn't wearing tzitzit. They're like, "Why aren't you wearing tzitzit?" So he says, "Well, I'm not wearing tzitzit because I'm wearing a borrowed garment. And if you have a borrowed garment, you do not need to have tzitzit on it for the first 30 days. In the meantime, while they're having this conversation, they bring in this person who was not honoring their parents, and they wanted to punish this person. So Rami Bar Tamre said to them, "What do you mean punish him? You need to release him, because when the Torah specifically gives a reward for a certain mitzvah, so then the court does not have the right to punish this person, meaning God is going to take care of it. You shouldn't take care of it." And the Gemara says that they looked and they said, "Wow, this Rami is very learned." And he says, "Yes, because I came from Rav Yehuda's town, and therefore I learned a lot of Torah." And the last thing for today is the liver. If you're familiar with cooking liver, generally you need to kosher it, I guess the word is clean it from blood. Generally, we do that by roasting it over a pan, and whatever comes out is generally thought to be blood, and you have to throw it out. So the Gemara says, like, can you cook liver in a pot? Not roast it, cook it. Now, again, here's what I was saying before, right? We said that if you're cooking it in a pot, the blood is going to come out. But if the blood is coming out, do you think that, right, the Gemara says it's not going to be reabsorbed by the liver because it's busy releasing things, so it's not going to absorb. So therefore, you could cook the liver. The Gemara says maybe the case is that maybe there's non-kosher liver with kosher meat, and that's the case, but we will get to that case next week. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions, but before that, next week is going to be, is that true? Hold on a second. I think next week is, hold on a minute. Let me just check before I forget, so that I don't want to make a mistake. Next week is regular Tuesday night, Be'ezrat Hashem. So mark that on your calendars. And yes, questions, comments. Yes, Aliza. I lost you.
One of us.
Aliza,
Okay.
Aliza.
You know, when you were, okay. You remember when you were talking about the two rabbis, and one said, "No, this is a practical thing," and no, this is a spiritual. But then within the spiritual, we started talking about demons, and I said, "Oh, Veshmir." That's because I'm thinking about Maimonides, and where did you go? Thinking about Maimonides, and I'm thinking, okay, well, he wasn't even alive. It was 1,000 years later. Does his philosophy now have some kind of influence on that?
Great question. Great question. Maimonides is a rational thinker. So Maimonides is always going to take the more, I would say, scientific, rational explanations, as opposed to the more demon, spiritual side of things. So yes, exactly. Meaning,
So he does. He does in the
yeah,
book. Okay. Okay.
yeah. But like you said, it's much later, so we shouldn't get confused. Meaning the Mishnah and Gemara are earlier,
Yeah.
Rambam comes much later. Yes, excellent.
I,
Ilanit,
oh, yes, right.
Oh, Zohar, did you want to go?
I just wanted to relate to what Eliza said, if I just may interject for a second. I heard a shir today from, I don't know the professor's name, but he was talking about Rav Kook and all his writings. And he asked people, to list, some of the writings, and all the names, books that they mentioned were all about, philosophy and his way of thinking. But he goes, you don't know, he had like 200 works or so, whatever. And he started first with halachic stuff, and nobody mentioned any of the halachic things. He said that the Rambam, first he wrote his halachic works, and then he wrote the Moreh Nevuchim. And had he written the Moreh Nevuchim first, nobody would have paid any attention to it, because who was this person who's writing? But as soon as he wrote his halachic works, then they paid attention to this Moreh Nevuchim. So yeah. So and his conclusion was that the halachic works and the outlook works are combined. In other words, as the Rambam or let's say the Av Kook, the way they made their halachic decision had to do with their outlook on various things. So yeah.
Thank you.
beautiful, beautiful. Yes, Ilanit.
Just this is a great time to ask a question I've been wondering about a long time about tuma. We learn so much about it and about how it needs to be removed, and then we get teachings that actually without the present day temple, and a lot of this is just we're just keeping habits so that we will easily be able to not transgress when we have the temple. So are we actually removing any kind of tuma with these actions right now today?
Great question. Great question. So it's an excellent question. What we say is that the tumah of the hands, tumat yadayim, is a very low level tumah. And when we wash, we are removing I would say a type of tum'ah. That being said, right, we are all impure. We've all come in contact, or again, most people have come in contact with being in a cemetery, at a funeral, maybe some animals in our house, meaning we've all been in contact, even when we go to the mikvah, which again, married women do. They are removing certain, if you remember, there are a lot of different types of or levels of tum'ah. So we are removing certain levels, but as we know, the ultimate level of tumat met, of coming in contact with a dead body, it cannot be removed till we have the paraduma. So to answer your question, we are removing one level of tuma, but it's like we saw, it's not the same thing as going to the Beit HaMikdash and going to the mikvah and, again, and, washing hands and feet like they did going to the temple. So different levels, but we are doing something, if that helps.
Thank you.
Yeah.
A bit of current
Excellent.
events. I think it was today that they made an announcement that a third red heifer has been born.
Wow.
some farm
Wow.
in Israel. So it's like, okay. But
Wow.
again,
Wow.
when they show a picture, it didn't look completely red. So, you know, it
Okay.
had a little bit of white hair. That's not red
Interesting.
heifer.
Interesting. All right. Wishing everyone, first of all, Chodesh Tov. It's Elul. Can't believe it's less than a month to Rosh Hashanah, which is crazy. Wishing everyone a Shavua Tov and a Shabbat Shalom, and see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank